All right, let's get this thing started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining HRAI, ORAC, and several of our industry partners for a deep dive into the refrigerant transition in Canada. Super excited to have you all here. We got a huge audience. We're going to get to the presentation very shortly. My name is Matthew Bradford. I'm going to be MC for today's presentation, and I am excited to share the screen with a number of industry leaders who will be sharing their insights on this important topic. We'll get to them in just a minute, but first, a couple housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared on HRAI's YouTube page following the event. We're also going to be doing things a little differently. We got a lot of people in attendance, so taking questions during the presentation might fill up our time. So what we're going to do is in the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. If you want to pop your question in here, we'll be collecting them and we'll look at them after the webinar and answer as many as we can and post the results afterwards. So if you want to find that again, that's just at the bottom of your screen in the Q&A button. If you need any help, just reach me in chat. I can help you with that. But without further ado, I'm going to be turning the show over to Sandy McLeod, President and CEO of HRAI Canada, to kick things off.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome. This is a very crucial topic that we've definitely been spending significant resources on over the past few months. We've got stakeholders through all of the divisions that are engaged in the process, one of the crucial things, Matt, are the slides up? I can't see them.
Not yet. Stephen, can you put the slides up, please?
Just want to get the slides started here.
Get the show going.
And we should be on the international impact of the change.
I had a technical issue there.
Okay. Slide 4, Stephen. So this issue is a global issue. It's not something that we're dealing with uniquely in Canada. And later in the presentation, you're going to hear deeper views on the Canadian issue. But I think what's important is what happens in one region, whether it be the European Union, the US, it ends up impacting countries like Canada. Next slide, Stephen. One of the key issues that we end up dealing with in this transition is the change from a flammability standpoint. And Jim Thomas is going to speak in a few minutes about the differences in a number of the refrigerants and their chemical makeups. But the key issue here is we're moving from something that is not flammable to something that has some level of flammability. And then that ends up impacting the building codes. And Stephen's going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. Next slide. We put together a working group that continues to have people added. And I think that the point here is we've got some of the best minds in the industry engaged in this issue, including some of your speakers today. One of the things that I've always found very valuable from an HRAI perspective is that if we don't have the expertise at HRAI, I know one of our members will. And that is definitely proving out to be the case as we're going through this process. Next slide. Next slide. So everyone will be introduced as they're coming up, but this is just a snapshot of who we have covered off here today. And I think you'll find, we're going to touch on B52. We're going to have an update from Environment Climate Change Canada. Ian's going to talk about some of the shipping and handling issues. And I mentioned Jim will give us an overview as well of some of the issues with the refrigerants themselves. Next slide. Back to Matt. You're on mute, Matt.
There's always technical issues at the start of these things. Sometimes human. As the slide reiterates, we are taking questions throughout the presentation. Please put those in the Q&A box. I see someone already has. We'll collect those and we will answer them after the fact. Without more of me, it is my turn to introduce Jim Thomas, President of Refrigerant Services, Inc., to discuss the transition to low GWP refrigerants. Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Matt. There's just a little bit of my history with these products. You can see I used them for service for a few years. I bought and sold them in the wholesale area, and spent the last 30 years in refrigerant reclamation, separation of refrigerant mixtures, and the development of blending and packaging of refrigerant blends. So these little molecules must be addictive because I've been around them for 55 years and can't seem to get away. Next slide, please, Matt. So we established Canada's first refrigerant reclamation facility in Halifax in 1993. We did it. We were the first in Canada because Nova Scotia was the first province to have regulations to protect the ozone layer. So we sort of got ahead of everybody else, and that's when we started in this process. We developed and patented some of our own technology, and we provided that to other companies in other countries in joint ventures and licensing agreements. And we partnered with a UK company to develop new refrigerant replacement blends. Next slide, please. So Refrigerant Services became a member of the HRAI task team back in 1999, became a service provider in 2002, and we began blending and packaging the RS series of refrigerants for the Canadian market in 2003. 2014, we began importing and packaging some of the more common legacy refrigerants for the Canadian market. Next slide, please. So these are our expectations, really, and the only thing I can tell you about my, in trying to figure out what's going to happen in the market, all of my expectations have been, of course, consistently wrong. So I'll say that at first. Anyway, but we don't really, we expect the volume of domestically reclaimed 22 to decline slowly over the next few years as the install base declines. We expect the volume of domestically generated reclaimed 410 to increase slowly as the install base continues to grow, as they're still installing 410A equipment. We expect the volume of recovered 404 and 507 to increase dramatically in the next couple of years as large users are taking advantage of the federal and provincial programs and policies to promote moving to lower GWP refrigerants. Next slide, please. With no current or expected provincial regulation banning the use of 22, we expect the pricing to be somewhat similar than it is right now. It peaked a few months ago and it's settled back down now, something still above the 22 replacement pricing, but a little less than where it peaked a few months ago. So we expect the price to be more or less stable for the next few years, even as the volume declines, because there is a limit, in the pricing as to what people will pay when replacements are readily available. We expect the 410A pricing to be relatively stable, and the supply of virgin and reclaimed 410 to be adequate for the next few years, barring any provincial regulations regarding GWP limits on existing equipment or international supply chain issues.
Jim, if I could just 2 seconds, are you able to speak up or turn up the volume on your mic?
Yeah, how's that? A little better?
Just a tiny bit more, just a smidge. You had a lot of great information. We'll make sure we're capturing it.
Yeah, I can't seem to find a place to set it up. Go to settings. Go.
There we go. It sounds better now. Just if we could.
That sounds better now? Okay.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah, maybe the next slide there, Matt, please. So in the short term, we think that 404 and 507 pricing is going to be towards the lower end of the HFC pricing, given the expected flood of recovered material coming out of the recovered industry right now. And with the reduced availability of virgin products due to high GWP, which encourages the import of lower GWP products by refrigerant suppliers. So this allows them to import a little bit more volume in terms of weight. So we think that will kind of stabilize things for the 404 and 507. Next slide, please. So these are the current common OEM refrigerants. So you can see that these go back to 1945 when they were invented, the fluorocarbons. And so we were using CFCs up to about 1995. And we've been using HCFCs up to about 2020. And we've been using HFCs now since about 1990. And more recently, around 2019, there was HFC and HFO blends being introduced, and CO2, of course. And now we're moving into A2Ls, which are the flammable products. They're HFO, HFCs, and HFO blends. So, and we might even be moving into hydrocarbons in some areas, depending on the applications. So basically, these are some of the existing. If you're looking at 2019, we've now got some new products coming online. Our 450A and 4513A are replacements for 134A, and 448A and 449 are replacements for 22, and also for 404 and 507. And we're moving into on the air conditioning side, it looks like R32 for the 410 equipment, and maybe perhaps 454B. So you can see the GWPs are quite a bit lower than the existing products. And of course, we have CO2 in the bottom there. Next slide, Matt, please. So in terms of sort of the equipment that's coming out now, and this is under federal regulations, under the ODCHAR regulations, basically we're now replacing the 134A equipment with equipment that will take, say, 450 or 513A or even 600A, which is isobutane in some areas like domestic refrigerators and maybe some small pop coolers and that type of thing. And with the R22 equipment is being replaced with 448A and 449A and perhaps R290, which is propane. And the trouble is, of course, with propane is it's highly flammable. And then we're replacing 404 and 507 equipment with 448, 449 equipment. You can see those are the molecules involved in these blends and the percentages. And you can see that these are mixtures of HFC blends with some HFOs added. You can see in most cases the HFO component doesn't get much higher than about 25 or 26%, and that's because once we go beyond that, we start to turn the blend into a flammable blend. So the 448 and 449 are A1 products, like the products they would replace. And on the 410 equipment, you can see that the R32 and 454 equipment is going to be coming out shortly, if it's not already available. And the issue there, of course, is that it's an A2L product, and flammable, and but you can see where the GWPs are quite low there compared to 410A or some of the other products. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the existing aftermarket refrigerants and what they might have replaced as we've been going along. You can see that pretty well everything we're using today comes under the A1 safety designation, which is non-flammable. And the GWPs range from about 1,400 up to about maybe 3,000 or so. And so we're gradually moving to lower GWP refrigerants. Next slide, please. So 134A, 404A, 507A, and 410A make up the majority of HFC imports into Canada, with 448 and 449 quickly gaining some market share for new and existing refrigeration systems. The HFC import allowance system is based on the overall CO2 equivalent. So if we import lower GWP refrigerants, we can import more volume or weight. And this will maybe offset the reductions in the allowances as we go forward. The increased recovered refrigerant created by the system conversions driven by government policies and programs will also contribute to the domestically reclaimed volume, which should also help with any shortages. Next slide, please. So to date, we haven't seen any really shortages of HFC refrigerants in the aftermarket. The import of lower GWP refrigerants helps with that, of course. And potential regulations that would limit HFC exports from international suppliers might be a problem in the future. We understand the Chinese government is going to introduce some restrictions on the production and exports of HFCs, and that could affect our supply, because a fair amount of the HFC supply in Canada is coming from the Asian market right now. The industry growth in general and the speed of transition to heat pumps in the Canadian market only adds to the potential of HFC demand and supply imbalances. So next slide, please. So Refrigerant Management Canada, of course, is the industry-funded program to look after surplus refrigerants. It was established in 2000, and it brings together managers, contractors, wholesalers, and service providers who collect the surplus refrigerant from the stationary refrigeration and air conditioning industry. And it has standards and guidelines in place to track the collection and disposal of refrigerants. Key element of the program is the ability to recycle and reclaim the refrigerants that we don't have to destroy, because there might be blends that are sort of unreclaimable, or perhaps a product like the CFC that would have no value in the marketplace. So hope the RMC should help us get through this transition as we go forward. So I think that's it for me. Thanks, Matt. And we'll hold the questions till the end, I guess, and or submit them on the Q&A button.
You got it. We already got a couple getting popped into the Q&A. Some directed at you, Jim. And if we have time at the end of the presentation, we might be able to get to those. But for now, we're going to hold them till after the webinar. But yeah, a big thank you, Jim, for joining us. And at this point, we're going to introduce Michel Gauvin with Climate Change Canada to talk about Canada's HFC Phasedown. Michel, are you with us? Oh, there he is.
Yes, I'm here. All right, thank you, Matt, and good afternoon to all. My name is Michel Gauvin, the head of the ozone layer protection programs here at Environment and Climate Change Canada, and I'm very happy to be here today. I would also first like to extend my thanks to HRI for organizing this webinar and inviting me to present. These are very exciting times in the refrigeration and some of the sectors that are moving away from high GWP HFCs to alternatives that have a lower environmental impact. So my presentation today will focus on the regulatory work led by ECCC with regards to HFCs. So maybe next slide, please. All right, so the regulatory framework in Canada with regards to HFC aligns with the commitments that we made under the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer, including the phase down of HFCs under the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. So the Montreal Protocol, it's a major international multilateral environmental agreement that regulates the production and consumption of about 100 ozone-depleting substances and HFCs. So as of October this year, about 155 parties have ratified the Kigali Amendment to phase down HFCs. This includes Canada, the US, and many of our main trading partners. So the phase down of HFCs have already begun for most developed countries, beginning on January 1st of 2024. So in a few weeks from now, there will be a 40% reduction on the consumption and production of bulk HFCs compared to baseline levels. And for developing countries, for most developing countries, January 1st, 2024 will mark a freeze on the consumption and production of HFCs compared to baseline. So Canada and the US have taken a similar approach to regulate HFCs by controlling a wide range of products that contain HFCs, as well as a phase down on the consumption and production of bulk HFCs. So just to note that for Canada, there's no production of HFCs in Canada, so the HFCs that are present at the domestic market came through imports. So in Canada, the regulations that control HFCs is the ozone depleting substances and halocarbon alternatives regulation, so the ODSHAR, and these are the regulations that my team at Environment Canada manages. So when these regulations were developed, there was extensive consultations that took place, and this took place in the mid-2010s. And the issue of regulatory alignment between Canada and the US was one of the key considerations. So the ODSHAR, kind of in its current state, was amended to introduce a phase out of HFCs and product controls, which came into force in 2018. So about five years or so now. And in the US, although there have been some differences in the timelines for the rollout of the regulations, and it was a little bit pushed back somewhat, the US EPA has recently announced final rules regarding controls on HFCs contained in products. So although the regulations in each country are distinct and they're different, they're not identical. Broadly speaking, they align in concept, as both of them have phase down of bulk HFCs in parallel to controls on certain products that contain HFCs. Next slide, please. So what does it mean for HFC phase down in Canada? So as I mentioned, the ozone depleting substances and halocarbon alternatives regulation is what implements a phase down in Canada and ensures that we meet our international obligations under the Montreal Protocol. So HFCs are not ozone depleting, but they have a very high global warming potential. Certain HFCs have GWPs that are thousands of times higher than CO2. So the graph on this page here shows kind of the path of the HFC phase down in Canada. The red line on top is our baseline value for HFC consumption. The green line is the path that we need to achieve under the Montreal Protocol. So this is an obligation that we have. So as a party to the Montreal Protocol, we're obligated to stay below this threshold. And this is on an annual basis. So every year we need to be below this line. And you can see on the blue bars, those are the actual HFC consumptions during the years 2019 to 2022. So as you can see, we're below the threshold. We don't have the information yet for 2023. We're almost at the end of it, so we would be able to have that information in the coming months. But a few key points to note here is that the 40% phase down step that starts on January 1st, 2024 is starting in a few weeks. So as you can see from this graph, the first line that's going down, that's where we need to be in a few weeks, starting in a few weeks. So there will be a reduction in the amount of HFCs that are imported in Canada in 2024. So we expect the next few years to continue that it will continue the accelerated market transition to equipment using lower GWP alternatives as we move forward, because in 2029 is the next step, and that's a 70% reduction in consumption. And just generally speaking, the ODSHAR and the measures that it's implementing, including the phase down and the product controls, is expected to reduce cumulative emissions of 168 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So, and that's between 2018 and 2040. So it is a substantial contribution to fighting climate change. Next slide, please. So in addition to controls on or the phase down of HFC consumption, the regulations also have a list of products that contain HFCs that are controlled under the regulation. So this slide shows a summary of the products that are controlled. and the date that these restrictions have come or will come into effect. So as you can see, they touch on a broad range of products that contain HFCs, so aerosols and foams, and many categories fall into the refrigeration equipment. So I will note that this list does not include every type of product that contains HFCs, but it was selected after broad public consultation with the industry and the public at the time these regulations were developed. So the regulations do not outright ban the use of HFCs in these products, but they set limits on the global warming potential of the HFCs that can be used in each category. So in many of these product categories, there can be several available alternatives, which may include lower GWP HFCs or completely different substances such as CO2 refrigerants, HFOs, hydrofluoroolefins, or potentially even hydrocarbons such as propane or isobutane. Next slide, please. Kind of the path forward from where we are now. So taking into account the information that I have mentioned in my previous slide, there's many moving pieces at this time, and I believe we'll also hear from other speakers today on some of these items. But over the next few years, there's quite a bit of change that we expect to be happening in the sector. So there's work on updating the building codes and standards to allow for broader use of flammable and mildly flammable refrigerants, which is ongoing. So this may open the door for the introduction of new refrigerants. The phase-out of HFCs under the Montreal Protocol is taking place across the globe. As I mentioned, about 155 countries so far have ratified the Kigali Amendment to phase out HFCs. Canada and the US in a few weeks' time will see a 40% reduction in production of bulk HFCs. The US has just introduced new rules on products containing HFCs, which will come into effect over the next few years. And even domestically, there's some products categories, controls on some product categories that will enter in effect in Canada. So one of the questions that we've been asked is whether ECCC is planning to adopt the same rules on HFC products as what the US just announced. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about the US rules in the next speaker. So this is a good question, and I think it's important to put in context of the existing regulations that we have in place here in Canada. So the ODCHAR is conceptually very similar to how the EPA in the US regulates HFCs and what was published a few months ago. So for example, there are many product categories containing HFCs that are already controlled in Canada, and some have been since 2019. Which are not yet controlled under US rules. So in addition, while the ODCHAR is may not control every type of products that contain HFCs, it does not restrict the adoption of alternatives in products that may currently have a high GWP HFCs. So a new product with lower GWP refrigerant could very well be introduced in Canada despite not having such an obligation under the ODCHAR. So at this time, there are no formal plans to amend the ODCHAR. However, we are taking stock of what's taking place in the industry. So we're looking at the regulations in other regions. We're looking at the evolving market dynamics in order to determine the next steps. So we're committed to continue engaging with interested parties and companies. And we invite really anyone to reach out to our team if you have any questions or comments. So from our perspective, the development of regulations, whether they're new or amendments, they go through a formal regulatory process, which includes public consultations. So you can rest assured that when it's time to have a look at these regulations, we would reach out to stakeholders to ensure that everybody's is well engaged. Next slide, please. So outside of the ODCHAR that I was just mentioning, I wanted to raise a couple of points that we're also working on. So ECCC is chairing a federal, provincial, and territorial working group on halocarbons. So this working group shares information on the implementation of respective regulations at the provincial and territorial levels, discusses issues related to regulatory questions and other issues of national interest. So just to add some context, in addition to the ODSHAR, provinces and territories have their own regulations regarding halocarbons. And they vary somewhat around the country, but generally speaking, they touch on kind of like the control of release of refrigerants, certification of technicians, and management of these substances. So if you believe there's some topics that you have that would be of interest to this group, again, you can reach out to us and see if it can be discussed within this working group. Next slide, please. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on Canada's GHG offset credit system. So this is another program that is managed by Environment Canada that could be relevant to this group. And this initiative was launched in 2022, and it's an important part of Canada's 2030 emission reduction plan. And it's really to encourage the undertaking of innovative projects that reduce GHG. So under this system, so GHG reduction could be turned into federal offset credits, where an offset credit is equivalent to 1 ton of CO2 equivalent. Excuse me. The ability to generate offset credits could create new economic opportunities for municipalities, foresters, farmers, indigenous communities, and other project developers to earn revenues for GHG reduction. And these offset credit could be sold and used for compliance by facilities regulated under the federal output-based pricing system, OBPS. However, there's no limit on who can purchase these federal offset credits. So individuals or organizations, including governments and businesses, could buy and use federal offset credits to meet emissions goals that they've set themselves, net zero targets, for example. So participation in the offset system is voluntary, but however, once a company or a person registers, the project proponents become regulated and must meet the requirements of the GHG offset system. So kind of a quick overview of how the system works. There's the GHG offset credit systems regulations, which contains the rules to establish and operationalize the system and general requirements that applies to all projects. And then under that, there's specific offset protocols that apply to different sectors that really kind of set out the specific requirements for the quantification of GHG reduction. So one in particular that might be of interest to this group is the reducing greenhouse gas emissions from refrigeration system protocol, which is intended to be used for undertaking projects to transition away from refrigerants that have a high GWP in the refrigeration system. So next slide, please. So just a quick overview of what this refrigeration protocol is. So it applies to refrigeration systems that are eligible under the protocol that are commercial and industrial systems, such as centralized refrigeration systems, standalone medium and low temperature refrigeration systems, commercial air conditioning, chillers, condensing units, and heat pumps. It doesn't apply for residential and mobile systems, however. So the protocol enables the generation of credits through two main activities, either retrofitting existing systems or installing new systems with eligible refrigerant. All of the conditions are set in the protocols itself, and a few other key requirements of the project must start after January 1st, 2017, and credits only can be issued after the project has been registered under the protocol, and the projects can generate credits for up to 10 years, unless there's some legal obligations for these reductions to take place. And then just one last point is that this protocol does not apply to systems that use ozone depleting substances as the refrigerant, as it's seen kind of a prior generation of technology. So that concludes my presentation. Next slide will show some contact information here for both myself, our team, as well as the GHG offset credit team. I believe the slides might be shared afterwards. So the following slide also has a list of links that might have or that has additional information on some of the information I provided.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you so much,
thank you.
Michelle. And
Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, and this will be shared after the presentation, also on the video, which will be on HRI's YouTube page. Moving things along, I want to introduce Stephen Chartrand, Regulatory Affairs with HRI Canada, to talk about the EPA's technology transitions rules.
There we go. Hi, everyone. So, yes, on October 5th of this year, the US EPA published its technology transitions rule. I won't talk, in the brief time I have, I won't talk about the TTR ruling in general. What I do want to draw your attention to are the key points as they relate to the Canadian marketplace and some of the main questions that members want to know about the ruling as they relate to the market here in Canada. So originally, we were under the impression that the TTR was going to impose a one-year sell-through period. There wasn't going to be an exemption for components to service legacy equipment, and that there wasn't going to be an option to transship product through the US into Canada. So after the ruling was published, that has changed, and the picture for the Canadian marketplace is much better than what we originally thought. So there is, in fact, an exemption for components to service or repair legacy equipment indefinitely. Manufacturers can transship product through the US into Canada, so long as it is not modified in any way or enters US commerce. And the compliance dates do range from January 1st to January 2028, depending on the product or subsector. So for January 1st, 2025, that would include standalone air conditioners and heat pumps. January 1st, 2026 for VRF systems, and then going up to 2028 for chillers. And then the sell-through period is not 1 year. It's in fact a 3-year sell-through period for products. So that, I think, concludes my very brief overview for the TTR ruling.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephen. At this point, I'd like to ask Pushpinder to turn on his camera and join us. He is the Director of Engineering and Services with Mitsubishi Electric Sales Canada. He's going to be taking us through a discussion of the next edition of the CSA B52 Mechanical Refrigerant Code. Pushpinder, are you with us?
Hi, Jim. Can you hear me, Matt?
Yep. You are good
okay,
to go.
Good. Thank you so much. Well, thanks to HRA. Sorry, I'll be quick. I'm in India. It's kind of midnight. But I'm as excited as I would be in Canada. Key topic, B52. There are a lot of questions. I was trying to answer some of Q&A questions here. I hope I answered some at least. So yeah, I'll deal with the B52. It's one of the key steps to bring A2Ls into our occupancy types and all that. And a lot of changes are happening between the previous version and the 2003 version, which is primarily taken from HS standard 15 and 34 as a baseline. So the current edition is 18, but it's going to move to 12, and it's going to move to 13th edition, which will be 2023 edition. It supersedes all the previous 12 versions since 1939, I believe. Yeah. So CSA handbook will take approximately 18 months to complete. Now it's available, sold online on CSA stores, and it comes along with HS standard 34 as a package. So next slides will give the overview of some of the key changes. I have only 15 minutes, but the code has gone drastic changes. So I'll try to touch only the key points, but I urge everyone to spend some time, get the code once it's launched, and spend some time just to make sure you learn all the changes, you're aware of all the design changes, the mitigation changes, or requirements, or detection requirement. There's a lot to learn once the new code is available. But if you're familiar with the updated HS standard 15, it will give you a good view of what to expect from the new CSA B52, which is the 13th version. So a lot of definitions have been added. One of the exemptions we had was the air conditioning in private residence. It's no more an exemption. If you recall, there were a couple of exemptions, like if you use air or water as a refrigerant, then those systems are exempted from the code. So those exemptions are still there, but we have removed one exemption where air conditioning system in private residence is no more exempted from B52. As I said, there are many new definitions. We are familiar with RCL and all that, but in the new code, you will see a lot of new definitions like EDVC, which is effective dispersal volume charge, effectively the maximum volume of refrigerant which is allowed based on the smallest space volume. There's LFL, there's effective dispersal volume, which talks about the space volume and the refrigerant volume, lower flammability limit. So we'll see a lot of these definitions in the upcoming B52 new code. Next slide, please. Can you move to next slide just for a quick check? Okay, yeah, so move to the back one. Now, this is where I would like to spend some extra time because it deals with A2L for human comfort application. It's one of the key chapters in the upcoming B52 code. So clause 4 deals with system selection and application requirement as per HSS standard 34. So there are so many annexes have been added right from A to Q, but each annex has its own content. So readers are introduced to refrigerant data table. So a lot of refrigerant tables have been updated with new blends or single fluid. So you'll see these tables are taken from HSS standard 34. So readers are strongly encouraged to have a copy of standard 34 in parallel with our B52. So Annex M, as I said, has all the tables which deals with the frequently used refrigerant. Can you go to next slide, please? 4.5 a clause. It's aligned with HSS standard 15 to determine the refrigerant charge limit for a system within effective dispersal volume or the volume of the space available simply. So in a nutshell, it's the EDVC calculation in here. So there are some flow charts which talks about the system charge limit flow path to assist in navigating through the requirement. There are new requirements include specific instruction for A2L, which are clauses 4.5.6, 4.5.5 as it's listed there. So very quickly, there are different formulas or calculation if you have air circulation in place or you have a detection mechanism in place and you're using A2L for human comfort. And if you don't have any of these, then there's a different criteria to calculate your EDVC. So it's all well documented in B52 code. Depending upon your system application, how you have designed the system, you would need to follow either first option or the second option to calculate your EDVC. So there are so many annexes. I'll very briefly talk about few. Annex M, as I said, deals with frequently used refrigerant. Annex N, it talks about calculating the size of the natural ventilation, depending upon whether it's A1 or A2L or A3. Annex O talks about releasable refrigerant charge calculation using time and allowable leakage rate in terms of kilogram per second or pound per second. Annex P deals with A2L refrigerant for human comfort. It talks about leakage detection and mitigation action. Just for an example, your output signal should be generated within 30 seconds if the refrigerant leakage concentration is 25% of its LFL. Now, each refrigerant type, whether it's R32 or 454B or 454C, they have their different LFL values, but this is how detection and the mitigation action has to be set in place. It's explained in Annex P. Annex Q talks about mechanical ventilation for A2L for human comfort. Your ventilation system still be running for at least 5 more minutes after, even when the concentration has come down under the set point value. So just some quick examples, but more details are given in all these clauses and standards and annexes, and they need to be properly understood and apply as per your application. Next slide, please. Clause 4.5.8, it provides some requirement for equipment location and installation requirement. So new calculations are provided for refrigeration system in corridor and lobbies. clause 4.5.9 is related to refrigerant quality, which is critical because, for example, if R32 is a single fluid, it can be reclaimed and reused. But if it's a blend, then it's a different story. So there are guidelines on the refrigerant quality in the standard B52, the upcoming one. Next slide, please. Changes to clause 5, equipment designs and construction. Please note that ASHRAE standard 15, which is kind of our fundamental or the baseline, it no longer addresses ammonia as a refrigerant, and therefore requirement in IIAR, which is your International Institute of Ammonia Refrigeration, should be considered. So that's a change. Another big change is the extension of the nameplate, which mentions the capacity. So it has been revised to the prime mover rating was increased from 500 kilowatt to from 125 to 500 kilowatt, but only for A1 and A2L. Keep in mind, if you have any other refrigerant, it still stays 125 kilowatt. But if you're using A1, which is R410A or A2L, then the prime mover rating is increased to 500 kilowatt. But it still says that site installation inspection per regional authority still is needed, but design registration, fabrication inspection, and field testing is not required up to 500 kilowatt as long as it's A1 or A2L. Whether it's a single refrigeration system or if you have more than one at a single location, then the combined capacity of all the systems should not be more than 500 kilowatt. Just to note, 5.6.1.1 added statement that pressure vessel in ammonia service in compliance with the standard and shall be exempted from CSA B51 clause 7.6.3. 5.6.1.2 is related to stress corrosion cracking. There's a new clause for pressure vessel containing ammonia, except the vessel primary containing oil to minimize risk of stress corrosion cracking. It's be manufactured with hot and or cold form heads. So these are instructions. I don't want to spend time in reading all that. It's the next slide. Sorry, Stephen. Yeah, so these are the details I was quickly reading for you. But again, the code has more details. I'm just highlighting some of the high-end items so that you're aware of all the big changes coming into our lives once B52 code is released. Can you move to next slide, please? Marking and labeling. So this is concerning your nameplates. So there are conversion formulas to calculate capacity into kilowatt. So there are formulas given. You can either convert from horsepower into kilowatt, or you can directly calculate whether it's a 3-phase motor or a single-phase motor. So all the formulas are given to convert to get the capacity in terms of kilowatt. If your nameplate doesn't mention the kilowatt directly. 5.13, secondary coolant system. New clause was added to address some of the Fernie report recommendation. It's concerning the potential risk of refrigerant leaking into secondary coolant, as identified with several risk mitigation options. So it's mandatory for consideration, but the solution isn't prescribed. So just to take a note, evaporator and condenser coil and associated header, a note was added to confirm UL 207 certification would satisfy this qualification requirement in ASME B 31.5 for heat exchanger coil and headers. Clause 6, if you can quickly move to. Okay, so this is concerning installation feature changes to ventilation and mechanical room. If you see here, so we are familiar with Class D, the way it's defined for the machinery room. So machinery room for flammable refrigerants classified 2L, 2 and 3. So these are the given details. So for instance, if you're using A2L or B2L, then any hot surface, for example, duct heater, it should be under 700 Celsius. So these are some fine instruction given in code If you're a consulting engineer or a design engineer, make sure you're abiding by all the instructions. So for reference, it's 700 Celsius, the maximum. It can be exceeding that limit. Duct heater is a good example. And vapor detectors to trigger ventilation system and alarm below OEL of the refrigerant, as I also mentioned even earlier. And if you have A2L and B2L, including ammonia, then automatic de-energization of equipment in machinery room for concentration above 25% of LFL. I think I would very briefly mention, I try to bring some of these answers in Q&A as well. So heat pumps or VRF systems are not a regulated product under ODSHAR table. You don't find these listed. So as of today, we don't have any specific limit, GWP set for the heat pumps and VRF specifically. But clauses are still applicable in terms of how would you calculate the minimum space requirement or maximum releasable refrigerant based on smallest space volume. So those instructions are still there. But in terms of regulation, chiller is the only known product under comfort application which is listed in ODSHAR table by ECCC, as it was explained by the previous participant. Machinery room electrical requirement include A2L and B2L. It helps to determine whether or not you are in zone 2 hazardous location. So those details are also given under 6.4 clause. Can you move to next slide, please? I think I already read this part. Clause 7, Table 5 additional note is given, which allows for use of an alternative method to determine required discharge capacity as per standard HS standard 15, section 9.7.5. There's a subclause concerning relief discharge outlet. It's concerning the location. So there are existing guidelines, but there's an addition location that not less than 2.1 or 7 feet above any adjoining roof level, limited to access by authorized personnel only. This is in addition to current 4.5 meter or 15 feet above ground level for adjoining accessible roof level, and 7.6 above any window, ventilation opening, or pedestrian walkway or exit in any building. I would also quickly mention, when you're doing this calculation, then depending upon your occupancy type, whether it's the institutional application or a commercial building or a residential building, the values are different. The conversion factors are different. So those are well documented, and please make sure you follow the relevant values when you are doing all these calculations, because it changes as per the occupancy type. Can you please move to Clause 8? So this is concerning subclause 2 maintenance. So I won't read all. It's quite in there, and because presentation will be saved for your future reference. So, but I will just touch on the key highlights here. So regular system check for the presence of refrigerant in the non-refrigerant containing system, such as secondary coolant system, which may include testing and analysis for the presence of refrigerant change in the level, and regular equipment test and check for ventilation system to verify the flow rate, circulation requirement, and all that. Yeah, that would be clause 8 under maintenance. Can we quickly go to clause 9? Next page. This is concerning decommissioning for partial or complete decommissioning or dismantling of your refrigeration equipment. Now, there are steps explained here. The plan shall be made available upon request by the authority having jurisdiction. The plan to include a risk assessment include, for example, the refrigerant exposure, refrigeration system to be fully evacuated and purged with nitrogen per plan. Essentially, it gives you all these steps, how the decommissioning will happen, how the information can be obtained, and it can be shared further with the contractor. What is the source of getting all this information? For example, individual or organization for decommissioning shall provide equipment owner with all the details, and the owner shall pass all the details to the contractor prior to the initiation of dismantling or decommissioning of the equipment. So that would be clause 9. I'm sure there are more questions than answers. It's just the case. But I do have one good news which I am glad to share with you all. I checked with CSA committee. So we expect our new B52 code will be released by 21st December 2023. We can treat it as a Christmas gift, but there has been a lot of curiosity by when B52 code will be released eventually. So our target date is in a few weeks. So 21st December 2023, or even before, we expect our code will be released to the public. And then it's your opportunity to get a copy of it, read it, go through it, and make sure you understand all the fine details, the changes, design, system installation, commissioning, all the mitigation practices, all the detection mechanisms, and all that. And because understanding of all these changes are key to address A2L into our building space. So that was the news I wanted to share right at the end. I think that would be all for me. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll stay in touch for any Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for staying up late to accommodate us, Pushpinder. Now,
no problem.
I'll have to get some deserved sleep. A lot of information is being shared this presentation. You're not expected to remember any of it. You can watch the video after the fact, and we will be posting the presentation to the HRIA website, as well as an FAQ in regards to all the questions we're getting. But enough of that. I'm going to pass it back to Stephen Chartrand, who's going to inform you about HRIA's work in preparing the building codes for the refrigerant transition. Stephen?
Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Pushpinder, for that rundown of B52. And it's great to hear that we're going to see its final publication very, very soon. So in light of this transition, one of our main objectives here at HRI is to ensure that to ensure the timely adoption of the next edition of B52 across Canada. And this would take care of the commercial and retrofit market, but overall, in the work that we've been doing across right across the country, the message is quite good. So right now, where we stand right now is we've received confirmation essentially from Atlantic Canada that they will adopt B52 within 6 months of its final publication. Similar in Ontario and Quebec, but we are awaiting official confirmation on that. We just heard from Manitoba and Saskatchewan that they will likely follow suit as in Ontario and Quebec. Where we haven't heard similar timeline for a 6-month or even an automatic adoption process is in Alberta, British Columbia. We are working on that. But when we did speak with the authorities having jurisdiction there, ABSA and TSBC, they told us that they do have a firm 12-month review process. But again, we are working on that. So, but overall, we are very, very confident based on the work that we've done so far that B52 will be adopted before January 1st, 2025, when the EPA's manufacturer and import compliance dates hit. So, but overall, I think, as just Pushpinder said, we will have this done with before that compliance date hits. So, where we might have an issue is, or still might, we definitely do have an issue, is in the new home construction market. So, before I touch that, I just want to give everybody a rundown of Canada's new National Model Code Development System. So, this was made effective November of last year, and it replaced the old system. But essentially, it's what this new National Model Code Development System is supposed to do is to harmonize the National Model Code system, and this would include the National Building Code. So what you're looking at right here is the structure of how this all works. So the Canadian Table for Harmonized Construction Codes Policy, that's the body that sets strategic direction for all the national model codes. The CBHCC is sort of the decision-making body for the codes. And then you have the Advisory Council, which HRI is a voting member of. They just advise on the strategic direction that is set by the codes policy table. And then you have like the broader codes community and the technical committees, which are responsible for developing the codes. So in terms of the timeline that we're looking at right now, for the adoption of the 2024, the next edition of the National Building Code is the 2025 one. It should be released by December 2025, and then the provinces have up to 18 months to adopt or amend and adopt. So Alberta, British Columbia, Quebec, and Manitoba do have their own provincial building codes. So that is part of the reason why this process is it's going to take quite some time. And what we're looking at right now is a possibly early to mid 2027 before we have the next national building code in place. But we are working on it. The Canadian Codes Policy Table just had a meeting on November 29th. We did send letters to all of the provincial deputy ministers who sit on that table, urging them to find a pathway forward to get B52 adopted into the National Building Code so that we don't have an issue with the new home construction market. We haven't finalized that yet, but we are working on it. And again, as with the B52 timeline, I think we are confident that we are going to have that solved. But as of right now, that's where we are on the new home construction side of this. So I think that's it for me on this, and I will turn it over back to Matt.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I'm going to turn to Ian McTeer, a consultant with HRAI, to talk about the shipping, storing, and handling of low global warming potential refrigerants. Ian.
Thanks, Matt.
Welcome to the stage. There he is.
Yes. We've been in, HRAI has been in touch with Transport Canada several times about the transportation of dangerous goods on the roads and rails of Canada. And there's been some good news and perhaps some bad news. Transport Canada has had regulations in place for dangerous goods such as compressed gases or compressed flammable gases on the books for a long time. And they don't see A2Ls as anything different than flammable compressed gas as it stands right now. So under the current regulations, we can use a shipping code UN 3358 for transporting refrigerating machines with flammable gas. So the regulations are already on the books for such equipment. However, that regulation is in regards to equipment or components that contain less than 12 kilograms of gas, so roughly 26 pounds. So essentially that regulation is going to allow us to ship residential equipment, certainly residential splits, and conceivably even some light commercial splits and package units. But the problem is going to come with units that need more than 12 kilograms of refrigerant, and there's some issues with cylinders as well. So the Transport Canada has informed us that any amendments to the regulations, of course, they must be reviewed, approved, and then there are legal requirements. They have to be published in the Canada Gazette 1 and 2. And they've told us these changes or amendments that we need to the regulations are going to take anywhere from 4 to 6 years. So that timeline doesn't really suit us. And they tell us that the only way that we can go ahead right now is to apply for what's called an equivalency certificate. That's part of the TDG regulations. That's actually part 14. And essentially what we have to do is show the way in which our activities are, how they're going to be carried out, will provide a level of safety equivalent to complying with the regulations. So we can apply for these equivalency certificates. Every OEM, it appears, is going to have to do it, and perhaps even some wholesalers, et cetera, will have to apply to in order to transport larger quantities of equipment and refrigerants. The issue we're having right now is we need to work on the language that will be used in our equivalency certificate applications. So we have assembled a working group, mostly of OEMs, for this purpose. So Transport Canada tells us that these equivalency certificates, in general, 75% are granted within a 90-day period. Some are going to take longer, and they're typically valid for 2 to 5 years. So we're going to go ahead, and once we develop the language for an equivalency certificate for the various products, we're going to do a test registration just to make sure it's going to work for everyone. Now, in the US, the Department of Transport has, the OEMs there have applied for US special permits that have a party participation, which means that one particular OEM that's applied for a certificate, other manufacturers can take advantage of that, but we're not doing that in Canada. These equivalency certificates are going to be granted to every individual who applies for them. Next slide, please. So when it comes to cylinders, we did put together this A2L cylinder storage option flyer. Now, we'll send this flyer out to everyone on the call. And of course, every HRAI member can get one as needed. I believe we've already sent quite a few out. So you can see that we're talking about storage opportunities and using shelf racks or solid piles. So you can see that there's a number of different opportunities for you to store these products. We tell you the construction material of your shelving, the storage height, and if a sprinkler system is required, and the separation from other flammable liquids is included. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So this storage flyer is based on the National Fire Protection Act and Chapters 1 and 55. We're amending, we've applied for a code change request for Canada's National Fire Code to reference the NFPA requirements. So you can see here that a warehouse protected with fire sprinklers can include 1 hour fire-resistant rated walls to create 4 separate control areas. Each control area can store up to 40,000 pounds of liquefied A2L refrigerants. So we've just provided a little graphic there showing you the fire separation barriers. And then when you talk about the maximum allowable quantity in a single control area, this may apply to wholesaler branch offices. For example, you've got your mercantile where you're allowed up to 20,000 pounds in a non-sprinklered area, or perhaps you'll have it in your storage, in your warehouse out back, etc. If you have a control area, non-sprinklered 20,000 pounds or sprinklered 40,000 pounds. So that flyer is available to everyone, and we'll make sure you get a copy. Next slide, please. So when it comes to cylinders, there's some issues there as well. As you can see in this photograph here, this contractor has several cylinders in his van, including refrigerants and compressed gases. Next slide, please. So these are the classic refillable cylinders that at least I'm used to. Perhaps you've used others. But the classic 30-pounder, and then we used to use the 123-pound squat cylinders fairly often. You can see the cylinder volume is 13.6 liters in the 30-pounder and 55.8 liters in the 123-pound cylinder. Next slide, please. The issue is under the current regulations, the current regulations exclude cylinders containing a class 2.1 flammable gas with a capacity greater than 46 liters in the scope of the 150 kilogram gross mass exemption. Now in the US, they call that materials of trade exemption. Here we're basing it on the weight of refrigerants or gases. So under this provision, this prevents refrigerant cylinders with 55.8 liter water capacity. These are your squats containing 2.1 flammable gases. So you won't be allowed to transport those cylinders. So HRAI's proposal would allow for certain class 2.1 flammable gases, namely our A2Ls, in the larger 55.8 liter cylinders to be transported in a contractor service van as long as the gross mass is below 150 kilogram limit and the requirements of those respective exemptions are followed. So the gross filled weight of the 55.8 liter cylinders varies by products, but it's typically around 73 kilograms. So in the under 150 kilogram exemption, the contractor's van could carry a total of 2 cylinders if they follow the guidelines. So you want to go to the next slide, please. So this is the transportation of dangerous goods regulation. This is part 1, part 1.15 special cases. This is your 150 kilogram gross mass exemption. So you see part 1.15, paragraph 1. So you're exempt from part 3, part 4, part 5, up to part 8. So you don't need to apply any of those rules if you're using the 150 kilogram mass exemption. However, if you want to go, if you need to go beyond the 150 kilogram mass exemption, notice that the part 1.16, section 1, you're still exempt from part 3 documentation, which is the shipping documentation, and the dangerous goods safety marks, which is the placarding, and the part 5 means of containment, which means the your A2Ls will be in the appropriate means of containment. But notice that you're not exempt from the reporting requirements and hazmat training. So the reporting requirements essentially means that you'll have to report any releases of refrigerant or any loss or theft of the dangerous goods or any unlawful interference with the dangerous goods, etc. So again, subsection 1 does not apply to dangerous goods, whether you're using the 150 kilogram gross mass exemption or the 500 kilogram exemption, to flammable gases that are in a cylinder with a capacity greater than 45 liters. So essentially then, we're working on that. That's it for A2Ls at this time. There's, of course, more to be done, as you can see, but we'll endeavor to keep members informed of our progress. Thank you.
And thank you. Much appreciated, Ian. We're nearing the end of our presentation today, but before we go, I want to share a video and then give Sandy some time to give closing remarks. Give us 2 seconds while we this up. There we go. Thank you so much for watching. I've also put that information in the chat. The website is hrai.ca/flammable. course, if you'd like to learn more about that training opportunity. At this point, let's turn it back to Sandy to take us out. Sandy, are you with us? There he is.
I'm here. Okay.
Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. I've seen in the chat and the Q&A people asking about where this material will be. We have taped this session and it will be available. The slides will also be available, and we will take the questions that have been posted and begin an FAQ on the website. And that is on hrai.ca, refrigeration landscape. Kind of watch that. It will be a live part of our website that will continue to be updated with these various pieces. We'll also have an Ask the Experts button there as well, so that you've got an opportunity to continue to drop in your questions. The questions that were dropped in today, we will deal with them there. We're pretty tight on time at this point, and there's a lot of fairly complicated questions that will probably also require some additional resources to properly answer. So keep an eye out for that FAQ. So if you can jump to the in summary slide. So I think, first of all, I'd like to thank all the presenters today. I'd also like to thank all the participants. At one point, we hit about 600 people on this call. So clearly, this is an issue that matters to the industry. And I think one of the questions that came up, and Michelle did kind of touch upon it, what does happen in the US impacts us here in Canada. Between what Environment Climate Change Canada is doing and what we're doing with the provinces, we may not end up with 100% alignment with the US, but I think we'll get pretty close, and I think we'll be able to function effectively. B52, great to hear that that's going to be actually launched before the end of the year. I knew it was they were targeting for the end of the year. Great to hear from Pushpinder that that will indeed happen. That will allow us to get more active with a couple of the provinces that have been a little slower to move. Stephen mentioned there was a meeting with the deputy ministers on November 29th. We were successful in getting this issue on the agenda, and I have a debrief with the National Research Council next week on just what happened at that meeting and what are some of the follow-up items to deal with. It was good to hear Jim talk a little bit about not necessarily seeing any immediate shortages for servicing the installed base. But I know in the US they're quite concerned about that. So I think definitely stay engaged with RMC. Used refrigerants coming back into the system will ensure we've got enough to continue functioning in Canada. And as always, follow the newsletter, watch for webinars and check the website regularly. I appreciate everyone's time during this last almost 90 minutes. And this will not be the last webinar communication that we'll have on this issue. We will definitely stay in touch. I hope everybody has a great afternoon, and we will sign off at this point. Thank you very much.